noches a
Good evening,
todos.
everyone.
Mi nombre es Eloy
This is Eloy
Tupayachi,
Tupayachi.
la organización del
Thank you for
Pueblo.
joining this
Queremos
community
agradecer a todos los que
meeting
se unen a
on
apoyar esta
anti-immigrant bill
voluntaria sobre la ley
SB153.
antiinmigrante SB153. Vamos a
We
hacer
are
un
going
recorrido
to
para
review it and try to
entender
understand what
cuáles son
sort
los
of
puntos
impact that
que han habido sin
bill
ser
is
aprobados
going
la
to
semana
have.
pasada. Vamos a
We're going
repasar
to take a look at the
también el
possible
impacto que va a
impact
tener, el posible
on
impacto que
the
tenga
community.
esta ley en la comunidad
And
y
also,
también
we're going to be
haremos un
taking a look
repaso
into
de
the
los
rights
derechos
of the
que tiene la
community
comunidad para
that'll
defenderse
allow
ante
the
esta
community to
nueva
defend against
legislación que
this
ya
Senate
pues,
bill, which
está
is
en
right
vigor
now
en el estado.
in the Senate.
Y sin más,
I
voy
am going to
a dar
start
inicio
this
a la
meeting.
ceremonia.
Thank you
Agradecemos
very
también a
much to
nuestros
our
panelistas del
panelists
día de hoy.
today. We have
Tenemos a
Sammy
Sammy Salkin,
Sulking.
quien es
She is a
secretaria de
political
política del
strategist at
ACLU
ACLU
of
of
North
North
Carolina.
Carolina. We
Está
have
Helen
Helen
Galez, mi
Galez, my
compañera del
colleague
Pueblo,
at El
organizadora
Pueblo.
política
She is a
del
political
Pueblo.
organizer at
Julian
El
Taylor
Pueblo.
es
Julianne Taylor,
abogada y
who's
directora
an
del programa de
attorney
seguridad y
and
salud del
director of
Centro de Defensa Legal de Charlotte.
the
Y
legal
Michelle
services
Delgado,
programs
quien
at the
es
Legal Center in
abogada
Charlotte,
de la
and
ACLU de Carolina
Honorable
del
Sir from
Norte.
NCU
Gracias
North
a todos por
Carolina. Thank
estar
you very much
aquí.
for being here.
Y sin
I
más,
will
le voy a
give the
ceder la
floor
palabra a mi
to my
compañera
colleague
Sammy,
Sammy,
quien nos
who is
va a
going to be
presentar la
introducing
primera
the first
parte
part
de este
of this new
esta nueva
legislation.
legislación.
Sammy.
Sammy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening. As Eloy said, my name is Sammy Salkin, and I am a senior policy strategist with the ACLU of North Carolina. And we are going to be talking tonight about Senate Bill 153. And so I will be getting us started with the first part of the bill. There are four main components, and we're going to walk through all of those different aspects of the bill one by one. And so we're going to be starting with the first piece of the bill, which is the first. So with this first part of the bill, Senate Bill 153 is the first law in North Carolina that is going to require that law enforcement agencies in our state enter into 287G agreements with ICE. And so that means that this law is going to formalize the cooperation between North Carolina law enforcement and the federal immigration agents. And so this evening we'll be talking a little bit about what these agreements might look like and how we can prepare. And so first, as some folks may know, a 287G agreement is an agreement entered into between a law enforcement agency and ICE, and it gives that local law enforcement or state level law enforcement the power to enforce immigration law, which is something that normally state or local police do not have. And so it essentially turns our state level or local level law enforcement into ICE agents. And there are three main types of 287G agreements. The first type of agreement is called the task force model. This is the agreement that has the most, or that gives local law enforcement the most power. And this allows state or local law enforcement agencies to make immigration arrests during routine police activities like traffic stops or DUI investigations. And so under this task force model, this allows police officers to question and to arrest people who they believe may have violated immigration law. And under this model, officers have the ability to issue ICE detainers, to issue arrest warrants, search warrants, and they're able to ask questions about somebody's immigration status. So again, task force model is the model that gives the most power to state or local police department. The second model is called the jail enforcement model, and this allows state or local law enforcement agencies to identify immigrants who are already in custody and place them into immigration proceedings. So under this model, officers are able to question somebody who they suspect is a non-citizen about their immigration status if that person has already been arrested and is already in jail. And so under this model, under this model, These officers are able to issue immigration detainers as well as question people about their status. But importantly, the scope is limited narrowly to only people who are already have already been arrested and are already in jail. And then the last model is a warrant service officer. This agreement has the least power, and this allows, or the smallest scope, I should say, and this allows local law enforcement officers to serve immigration warrants on people who are already in custody. And so under this model, agents are not permitted to ask people questions about their immigration status, and they are not able to issue warrants. They can only carry out a warrant for somebody who is already in jail. And so now we'll talk a little bit about the different agencies that are going to be impacted by this new law. And so, as we said, there are 4 agencies that are going to be required to enter into a 287G agreement. The first is the State Highway Patrol. This is the agency that is responsible for traffic safety, law enforcement, and emergency management on public roads in North Carolina. The second agency is the Department of Public Safety. They're responsible for a lot of the oversight of different law enforcement agencies in our state, and also have oversight or responsibility for things like emergency response and some homeland security functions. The State Bureau of Investigations will also have to enter into a 287G agreement, and this agency typically conducts criminal investigations into usually more serious crimes like drug trafficking or arson. And the last department is the Department of Adult Corrections, which is the agency that manages our prisons, as well as probation and parole services and reentry programs. And so what's important to remember about this component of Senate Bill 153 is that even though this bill technically went into effect last week when the veto was overridden, it is going to take time for these 287G agreements to actually be drafted, signed, and implemented. And so as of right now today, none of these agencies have active 287G agreements yet. And so what we don't know and what we still have to figure out is, what exactly these 287G agreements are going to look like. So as we talked about, there are 3 different types of 287G agreements. And all of these different law enforcement agencies have different functions and different scopes. And so we do not yet have the information about what exactly these 287G agreements are going to look like once they are written down on paper and signed. And so we are hoping that we will be receiving more information from the administration in the coming weeks about what the process of actually getting these agreements ready to be enforced is going to look like. And the ACLU of North Carolina and El Pueblo are going to share more information as soon as we have it. But for right now, the important thing to remember is that even though these agreements are coming, they have not yet been signed and they are not yet being enforced. But this evening, we are going to be talking a little bit later in the presentation about making sure that everybody knows their rights when interacting with law enforcement to help us prepare for when these agreements go into place, and also some resources to help you, your families, and your communities prepare. And so moving to the second component of this bill, and I should say we will have time for Q&A at the end. So please do feel free to put questions in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we will be responding to as many of those as possible towards the end of the presentation. And so, as we look at the second part of the bill, the second piece is going to require that our state agencies take additional and largely unnecessary steps to prevent any undocumented immigrants from receiving certain public benefits. Even though we know that already undocumented immigrants are not eligible for the majority of public services. But we are really lucky to be joined this evening by Julianne from the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy, who's going to spend some time also later in this presentation really walking us through potential benefit changes. And so we will be coming back to talk about this section more in depth in a few minutes. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Helen from El Pueblo.
Gracias, Sammy.
Thank you, Sammy. Thank you very much for being here with us. We're going to move on to the next section. The next section is the third part of this bill. This section of the bill removes governmental immunity from local governments that violate the state's anti-sanctuary law, as they are commonly known. In very simple terms, what this means is if a county protects a person who's considered an undocumented immigrant, the local government could establish protections and could be subject to civil lawsuits. Now, it's important to acknowledge that in practice, this doesn't change anything for our state in North Carolina because we already have laws prohibiting our government and these counties to act as sanctuaries. So, in and of itself, this part of the SB153 is creating more fear amongst the community. But in reality, it doesn't make a real change because we have laws making sure that we cannot be a sanctuary type of territory. All right. And this is the next section, the fourth section of the bill. This specific part would impact only universities under the UNC institution. It applies to very specific institutions. This part of the bill prevents UNC schools from passing policies that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. In practice, what this means is universities are not able to create policy limiting cooperation with ICE agents. But we really don't have a law at the moment that requires this. But it also causes UNC schools to not be able to draft up their own policies and to change access to these immigration authorities, meaning that they would be able to access campuses and physical infrastructure and facilities. It's important to remember that we already have laws and federal criteria that these law enforcement agents have to abide by. So what this means is universities are not able to refuse sharing information about students' immigration status with ICE or law enforcement agencies. The main thing about this part of the bill is to sow fear in the community. It's important for us to recognize that, as was mentioned before, it's important to remember when this bill will be made active. This bill is active right now, and it's important to recognize that there are different processes, and the implementation part is still very uncertain. We're still organizations like ACLU, El Pueblo, and other local organizations are keeping an eye open to find out what this bill would imply and what impacts it would have once implemented. It's important first to monitor who's entering into those agreements and what sort of changes that would cause. Thank you. Thank you, Helen. Please remember everyone who's joining us right now. You're asking questions in the chat, and we're going to try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We are now going to review
¿Cuáles son nuestros
what our
derechos
rights
y
are
cómo podemos
and
defendernos
how we can defend
cuando esta
ourselves
ley y se
once this
implemente
bill
ya entre
is
totalmente en
completely
vigencia?
implemented.
Y para eso voy a darle paso
I'm
a
going
la
to
abogada y
give the
ACLU,
floor
Michelle
to
Delgado,
Michelle
para que nos dé un
Delgado,
breve repaso
ACLU's attorney,
de
so that
algunos consejos
she
y
can give us
recomendaciones
some
y
tips and
recordarnos
recommendations, and so
nuestros
that she can
derechos.
remind us of our
Michelle,
rights.
adelante.
Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Delgado. I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of North Carolina. I'm going to do just a quick, short general know your rights just to get us started. First, please know that this, as a disclaimer, this is not intended as legal advice and is not a full exhaustive list of all like everything that can happen here, right? We're just going to just do a general overview. Hopefully you find it helpful. Regardless of your legal status, everyone here has constitutional rights. The first one being that you have the right to remain silent. Please remember that anything you tell any officer can be later used against you in both criminal court and immigration court. So if you want to exercise your right to remain silent, I suggest always asserting that and just saying, I'm going to be silent now. I would like to talk to an attorney. You do have that right. You do not have to consent to a search of yourself or belongings without a judicial warrant. So if an officer asks us to search your bag or your vehicle, you can say, I do not consent to this search and ask to see a warrant. Obviously, there are some circumstances where an officer can search certain belongings or vehicles depending on like probable cause and such like that. But it's important that you do not actively say, give consent if it's not necessary. That way, when you consult with an attorney later, you can let them know that you didn't provide consent. You have the right to an attorney. If you want to speak with an attorney, I highly recommend that you all state it. Say, I am not going to speak until I speak with an attorney. I would like an attorney. I would like to speak with an attorney. All variations of the same phrase. You have the right to record interactions with police and immigration agents. So you do have the right to record what is going on. If you're a person that is not actively involved in a situation, but you're recording for someone else, just be mindful of not getting in the way. If officers tell you to step back, I highly recommend that while you're recording, you say, I am stepping back now, and do that. So you do have the right to record, just do not get involved in the interaction if you're just observing. If it's you that's recording, continue to record as long as you can and make sure you let your attorney know later that you do have recordings. You do not have to answer questions about where you were born, whether you are a U.S. citizen, and how you entered the country. If you do not want to answer those questions, I again suggest saying that I'm going to remain silent and I would like to talk to an attorney. You do not have to answer those questions. And remember, again, anything you say can be used against you later. All right, next slide. All right, if you are stopped while driving, let's focus on the driver's rights. If the driver is pulled over, remember again, you do have the right to remain silent. You do not have to answer questions about your immigration status. But what you should expect is that an officer can require you to show your license, your vehicle registration, proof of insurance. They can ask your name and address or the owner's name and address. And remember that if you're driving without a valid license, that this may increase your chance of detention. So those kinds of questions are normal for anyone who is driving. But if it goes into your immigration status, you can say that you're going to exercise your right to remain silent, and you do not have and say that you do not wish to answer those questions. And make sure when you are talking to an attorney later, if this escalates, that you let them know that you asserted your right to remain silent. Next slide. Passenger rights. If you're a passenger in the vehicle, you also have the right to remain silent and you do not have to answer questions about your immigration status. You generally don't have to show your ID if an officer asks. Refusing to show your ID is usually not a reason to be detained unless the officer claims there's reasonable suspicion that you are involved in a crime. And you do not have to answer questions about your immigration status as the passenger. If you're arrested or detained, you can remain silent and ask for a lawyer. Say you wish to remain silent and ask for a lawyer immediately. Do not explain anything. Do not sign anything. Do not decide anything without consulting a lawyer. Especially if you're not understanding what is being presented in front of you, whether it's written, whether they're asking certain kind of questions that are confusing. It's always best just remain silent and say that you're remaining silent and ask for an attorney. It's also important that if you're at risk of being arrested or detained, that you memorize your immigration number. It's typically called the A number. Make sure that number is shared with your family and friends. That's the best way for them to locate you later. And keep a copy of your immigration documents keep a copy with you, but also give someone that you trust a copy so they can provide that to an attorney. Okay. Um, if you're arrested by police, you have a right to a government appointed lawyer if you cannot afford to hire a lawyer. If you ever hear the phrase public defender, court appointed attorney, those are typically the government appointed lawyers that will represent you on the underlying criminal charge, whether it's a traffic ticket or some other kind of criminal charge. You have a right to make a local phone call. Calls to lawyers cannot be monitored by law enforcement, but I want to emphasize that if you're calling out, trying to reach attorneys, that line may not be secured. So make sure anytime you're talking to a lawyer, you confirm whether the line is secure. The attorney should be able to tell you that. But any other calls, they are being recorded, and anything you say on those phone calls will be used against you. So it's best that you keep those calls to a minimum and you're just accomplishing what you're trying to do, which is reaching to an attorney or reaching your family. But do not discuss your immigration status. Do not discuss the underlying facts of your case. If you're detained by ICE, you have a right to consult a lawyer, but the government is not required to provide you one. You can request a list of free and low cost lawyers. This is why it's probably important in making a plan with your family or friends that you go ahead and have ideas about who you may hire if the worst case scenario was to occur, because the government is not required to give you an attorney. If detained by ICE, you have the right to contact your consulate and have them notify of your detention. And while in jail or detained, an immigration agent may visit you. Do not answer questions or sign documents before consulting a lawyer. Read all documents carefully and request an interpreter if needed. Non-citizens and convictions. Ask your lawyer how a criminal conviction or a plea affects your immigration status. Do not discuss your status with anyone but your lawyer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Once again, the recommendations that Michelle has shared with us tonight, as well as many more, can be found in our emergency guide, Familias Seguras, or Safe Families. You have QR codes on screen to access the Familias Seguras pamphlet. We have a version in Spanish and in English, and we strongly recommend you do that. Please stay up to date on the tips we're constantly sharing out on immigration. Please check out the Familias Seguras pamphlet. We want to share some more resources with you. We have a more extensive guide for immigrant families. This is a list of resources. It's available in English and in Spanish. Both QR codes are on screen. And also, the North Carolina ACLU has their own list, their own Know Your Rights list, many of which have been shared with us this evening. Before we start with the questions, I'm going to give the floor to Julian Taylor, who is going to tell us a little bit about the second part of this SB153, the part that pertains to public services. I'm going to allow Julian to show us our information. Please go ahead, Julian.
Thank you, Eloy. Hi, everyone. I am Julianne Taylor with the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy. I am the director for our public benefits unit with a specific focus on healthcare. So tonight, while I will be talking about public benefits, you'll notice that my presentation sort of goes towards the healthcare piece and primarily Medicaid. So I'm going to share my screen. And this presentation is part of a larger presentation that we have. So depending on interest, I may go further into it. But so with SB153, regarding the public benefits piece, primarily what has occurred is that we're looking at attempts to limit eligibility for state-funded benefits. So there's a list of about 16 state-funded benefits, but the way that the language is written in SB 153, it is specifically focused on individuals who they're calling them non-citizens who are not here legally, so undocumented individuals. For anybody that deals in the public benefit space or with immigrant eligibility, you all know that individuals who are undocumented cannot access most of these services. So primarily what it's doing is it's putting additional onerous on DHHS, on the counties, to create more of a verification for individuals when they're applying for benefits. I do know that a question has come up about non-citizen parents of citizen children. The children are still eligible for Medicaid and these public benefits. However, it is designed to create fear and to have people who are eligible no longer go to seek these sorts of benefits, specifically Medicaid, TANF. Something interesting about SB153 and the public benefits piece is that it doesn't touch anything about food stamps. It also doesn't touch anything about the Women, Infant, and Children program, which is also known as WIC. That is for expecting mothers and new mothers and their babies. So those programs have not been touched by SB153. But ultimately, in reality, what this is doing is creating just more work for the DSS offices to verify immigration statuses. But they already do this, so I'm curious to see how much further they can go with it. So to dive into other things that are sort of impacted by this, as you all may or may not know, under HR 1, also known as OBA, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, there are lots of changes coming down to public benefits in all states with this federal law. And so one of the things that we know is going to happen is that there are a ton of changes that all states are having to make to their Medicaid programs, their food stamp programs, and other public benefits in a very short period of time under HR 1. So the states are already under a ton of stress and pressure. They've also experienced funding cuts, which has resulted obviously in less staff. And so these DSS offices are going to be, and our larger DHHS for the state is under an immense amount of pressure to change systems, to implement these programs by a certain date. So the thought that this additional verification under SB 153 would go into effect anytime soon, and this is just me speculating, is slim. I would say it's probably going to be some time. As we heard from Helen, this is sort of, it's here to instill fear, and it's going to be a while before we know about any sort of timeline on any of this. Technically, it's effective immediately, but the requirements under SB 153 is for them to implement more verification systems. Again, it's interesting to me because undocumented individuals cannot access this, but what I do think it is doing is creating fear and concern among families who may be mixed status families who have undocumented individuals in their family, but then they also have maybe U.S. citizen children or U.S. citizen family members who do qualify for these programs. So I think that's really where a lot of the concern lies. So something else that I did want to talk about that is better news that we also received today with the releasing of the budget from the General Assembly is that, so in April of this year, there was HB 696 that was passed that was pretty devastating for anybody who's familiar with that. It had a pretty big impact, especially on the public benefits piece. So one piece that we were really concerned about as advocates was the CHIPRA option, which allows pregnant women and children, even with various lawful statuses, to access Medicaid. And what HB 696 was going to do is take that away, which is going to impact around 27,000 people in North Carolina, which is an insane number. So with the budget passage today, we found out that they are not going to, they're not going to remove the chipper option. North Carolina will continue with the chipper option, meaning that pregnant women and children with various immigration statuses will still be able to access Medicaid. So that is great. That is a really big win, even though this never went into effect. The fact that we thought that this would happen in October was pretty devastating and really difficult to tell people. So that is really good news. What we don't know, because this wasn't in the budget, is that with HB 696, there is a provision in there about providing emergency medical services, which is one of the very few services that individuals who are undocumented can access. If they have an emergency, they go to the hospital and they need Medicaid, they can generally get emergency Medicaid if they apply within a certain amount of time and they meet other eligibility criteria. However, HB 696 is saying that Medicaid will no longer require to provide that. And that includes labor and delivery for individuals who are undocumented. So it did not, there is nothing in the budget, at least that I've read. It is over 600 pages and I got through what I could today. So as far as I could tell from today, they didn't touch on the emergency services piece, which is unfortunate. But we are really glad to know that pregnant women and children that are lawfully present will still remain eligible for Medicaid in North Carolina. So that is very good news. Because we are talking about this, I did briefly just want to go into some of the changes with Medicaid that are going to be occurring in October of this year regarding public benefits and eligibility. So they are changing who is essentially a qualified immigrant for purposes of public benefits. And that is going into effect in sorry, I got a message and that's always distracting. That is going into effect in October. So individuals who remain eligible for public benefits are LPRs, green card holders, Cuban and Haitian entrants, and COFA migrants, which is a very small group of immigrants. And the individuals who are losing the coverage are these individuals. And so there will be a significant change, and that will affect around 22,000 North Carolinians come October. Something that does often come up is just sort of like safety around going to the doctor if you are undocumented, but you have a U.S. citizen children. And I know that the Know Your Rights piece with the rest of SB 153, that was a big part. And I feel like that was really powerful information. So I did want to share we do have some things here. So anytime that you are applying for Medicaid or dealing with Medicaid, you do have the right to an interpreter. You have a right to an appeal and a fair hearing. And there are resources available. We're a member of the Statewide Navigator Consortium. They're a really wonderful resource to help people understand their health care. What are their options? What are they eligible for? If they got a notice in the mail and they're not sure what this means for them, if they were supposed to get notices in Spanish and they came in English, the Statewide Navigator program is absolutely wonderful. These slides will be shared with you all after the presentation, but this phone number is a really great phone number to be able to access that, the 1-855-733-3711. But what I did want to say is that in 2025, around November, CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they did start to share information with ICE on Medicaid recipients and that sort of thing. So while North Carolina says they're not specifically sharing information with ICE about immigration statuses, they are required, our North Carolina Medicaid program is required to share information with CMS, and therefore CMS then sharing information with ICE. So individuals who are currently enrolled in Medicaid and are eligible should remain enrolled in Medicaid. Unenrolling from Medicaid won't do anything because that information has already made its way to CMS. So individuals who are enrolled in these programs may as well continue to be on those programs and access that care. And then also I wanted to bring up one last thing in just accessing care is HIPAA. That providers are under individuals who are subject to HIPAA are generally doctors, providers, therapists, those sorts of things. They are required to keep all of your information private. Anything that is PII, that would include an immigration status. And so unless there is a reason, like some sort of crime or something being in the process of a crime or avoiding a crime or something like that, that individuals going to seek care from providers should know that they are protected by HIPAA. And you do want to make sure that you're going to a provider that you feel comfortable with, that you feel safe with, and that is a safe place because of the policies that are coming out and moving forward, such as SB153. But just something that I wanted to share with everyone. And we at the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy, along with many of our other partners across the state, we are in the process of creating resources for the individuals who will be losing coverage in October. Low cost and free clinics where they can go. Also remembering that if an individual needs to go to a hospital, there are amazing charity care programs that individuals can apply for regardless of immigration status. And then also the third thing that I would say is also the medication assistance programs that exist, such as MedAssist of North Carolina, to be able to access some medications that are out there. So those are just a few. I know I kind of segued off SB 153, but it is sort of intersecting with all these other policies, and I just want to make sure we cover all of that.
Thank you very much, Julianne, for that wonderful information. We have 20 minutes left. We're going to be using them for questions and answers. Let's start with the following question. There's a question asking if this new bill will make it mandatory for the sheriff office and the police to collaborate with ICE.
So this bill will not impact the sheriff department. Sheriffs of North Carolina do have to cooperate with ICE based on House Bill 10 and House Bill 318, which were passed in 2024 and 2025, respectively. But that cooperation does not have to be in the form of a 287G agreement. So there is nothing that mandates that sheriffs enter into a 287G agreement. Now with Senate Bill 153, only the 4 agencies that we discussed are going to be required to enter into this agreement. But for all other agencies, they are able to choose to opt in to a 287G agreement. So right now in North Carolina, we have 28 active agreements across the state. And so all of those agencies opted into that. They are not required. So again, the only requirement is going to be those 4 state agencies that we talked about.
Thank you, Sammy. Another question. Is there anything we can do to stop this bill at all?
So unfortunately, since this bill has been passed into law, it will go into effect. Where the power for those of us who are able to vote lies is that we have an opportunity coming up later this year to vote for people who are going to, represent the things that we care about. And so, looking to the future, we have an opportunity in North Carolina to elect pro-immigrant legislators. And so down the road, we might have an opportunity to change this law. But at this time, our options, we don't have any options at this time.
Thank you, Sammy. There's another question about Medicaid. I'm going to ask Julianne to answer this question. What happens with children who have Medicaid but whose parents are undocumented?
So the children are they remain eligible for Medicaid. However, with HB 696 and SB 153, it does seem like they want to put in place additional verifications to request information about other members of the household, even if they are undocumented. However, currently they are not allowed to ask that. And so if an individual needs Medicaid or has Medicaid now, they should not be asking those questions, and they should apply for Medicaid or keep their Medicaid. I do think that there may be some pushback on some of that. I think a lot of that is just kind of up in the air right now. But US born children, US citizen children should be able to, they will remain eligible and continue to keep their coverage. And there's no reason, at least currently on the application, for anyone in the household to have to provide any additional information about their immigration status if they are not the applicant applying for coverage.
Gracias, Julian.
Thank you, Julian. Another question for maybe Michelle or Sammy. If you're driving without a license and you're stopped by highway patrol, can you present ID from another country, for instance, foreign passport?
So if you are undocumented and you're driving without a license and you are pulled over, regardless of immigration status, even if you're a U.S. citizen, if you're driving without a license, you will likely be arrested. So I don't recommend showing any documentation from another country at that point. You just say you do not have a license, and after that, exercise your right to remain silent and get an attorney. I wouldn't offer information about my immigration status at that point.
Another question. How does this affect somebody with DACA or TPS?
I can start. So the main pieces is that, if somebody has some type of legal status like DACA or like TPS and you have an interaction with law enforcement, typically we would recommend that you share the documentation with them showing that you have legal status here. And so, hopefully in terms of traffic stops or things like that, people will not, there shouldn't be too much of a significant impact on DACA or TPS holders because those folks have legal status. But I don't know, Julianne, if there's any changes that you wanted to reiterate in benefits for DACA or TPS.
No, unfortunately, with DACA, especially like with the marketplace health coverage, they were allowed for a year to be able to enroll in marketplace coverage, and then that's been taken away, which is really unfortunate. So the limitations that existed on DACA prior to like the Biden administration they're still in place. And TPS holders fall under the category of individuals who have like limited eligibility for some of the programs. But as far as SB 153 goes, I don't think so.
Thank you, Julianne, Sammy, and Michelle. There's another question here. This question is about something you mentioned before, Sammy, but if you could reiterate it, please. If somebody's pulled over on the road, the driver is American, but the passenger is undocumented, what do we have to do? What are the steps to follow?
So if you are driving and you are pulled over, obviously the officers will ask for your license and registration. Go ahead and provide that required documentation. If your concern is that they will ask about your passenger who is undocumented, again, your passenger has the right to remain silent, so they do not have to answer questions, and they can assert that right to remain silent. And if they are asking you, you can say that you are not going to answer questions regarding your passengers, and go ahead and just assert again, like, I am the person driving. I have provided you my license and registration. I do not wish to answer questions about any of my passengers, and leave it at that point.
Thank you, Michelle. We have another question for Julianne. Julianne, would you recommend undocumented parents of legal citizens to continue applying for public benefits?
I'm not going to make a recommendation. I think that this is really up to the family. I would say until October, so it is June, until October, I think that individuals should feel comfortable to and continue to apply for benefits for family members, specifically children that are citizens or have a legal status. For undocumented parents, that is just tough. I mean, I would say that they're definitely trying to instill fear. It just doesn't seem. I would say that if applications change where they're asking for immigration information for individuals who are not the applicant, to be wary. But until that time comes, I would not be concerned about that, because there's no reason that these agencies should have any information about someone that doesn't have that is undocumented, because they're not the applicant, they're not applying for coverage, so there's no reason why they should have that information. But I really think it's a personal and like educated preference on how they feel about whether or not they think it's worth it to access those benefits. I think that's a really difficult spot to be in. And I think, if the child has significant needs, that maybe, that's a risk worth taking. But as of right now, there's no reason that information about someone who is not the applicant, especially regarding immigration status, is shared with Medicaid, the DSS offices, DHHS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And so I would continue, if you have a child who is eligible and needs Medicaid, to continue to apply for that. And if at any point you get a notice that's requesting more information from a non-applicant, or there's anything like that, you should contact a legal aid attorney, or the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy if you're in one of the counties that we serve, and they would be able to advise you on that. I will also say that the number that we gave out earlier, the 855-733-3711 for the North Carolina Public Benefits Navigators, that's a statewide program, and it is facilitated by Legal Aid of North Carolina and has a lot of legal entities as members. And so if you reach out to that program to ask questions about eligibility or advice on how should I proceed, or, these are the questions that I have, or what am I eligible for? Should I do this? If it gets to the point of needing legal advice, they have a really easy funnel into the legal entities. So it would be a good place to start to get general information and to get educated on what the changes are and what's going on. And like I said, if it rises to the level of needing, legal advice or legal questions, they're able to directly refer to our legal team. So that's a really good place to start regarding that. And also, like I said, there's so much information coming out right now and so much changing that some of this could change by October 1st. I mean, it could change by tomorrow, could change by next week. It's difficult to sort of gauge that. So I think just constantly trying to keep up with the information and reaching out to navigators about their knowledge and what they know, and kind of advising people how to proceed is the best way to go. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but that was a tough question.
Thank you very much, Julian. A question about the third, I think it was the fourth section of SB153. Faculty and students at UNC campus, do they retain the right not to be detained as long as they're inside the campus?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so we have received, I think, 2 questions asking about private spaces versus public spaces. So there was a question about the private spaces on campus, or about whether ICE agents are able to enter private areas and places like churches. Michelle, could I tap you in to talk a little bit about the rights like in a private space versus a public space and what that can look like in terms of access for law enforcement agents?
Yes. So generally, law enforcement agents can enter anywhere that's deemed public. So typically like lobbies, I guess in front of a building, anywhere where the public can enter, agents can enter as well. What I would always recommend to any churches, businesses, if there are areas that you deem private, go ahead and put a sign that says like private, employees only, staff only, something that makes it very distinct and clear that this is not accessible to anyone in the public. And that's what will help make that difference. Because at any private areas, the agents will need a judicial warrant or judicial subpoena to enter those areas and talk to anyone back there. So, yes.
And how does that apply to classrooms, Michelle?
So typically classrooms are not open to the public. So if that's the case, then they shouldn't be entering classrooms. Um, yeah, I think that's about it. Just like dorms are typically you need like a card to enter those areas. Agents can't enter those areas because they're not deemed public. They're for students only. So I guess you'll have to always when you're talking about a space or room, wondering, okay, can anyone off the street enter this area? If the answer is yes, then agents will likely be able to enter that area. Sorry, I see something about faculty officers. Same concept applies. Is it typically open to the public? That's what the school needs to decide. Is it clear?
Thank you, Michelle, for the answer. We also, following up to that question, we do have another question asking, do churches, synagogues, friends meetings, and other places of worship have the right to refuse entrance to ICE agents?
Should have the right is different from what are the rights, right? So, I mean, I believe they shouldn't have a right to do a lot of things, but as far as what it is again, is it open to the public typically? So if places want to make it a members only, for example, where someone off the street cannot enter, that would be a different situation where you got to analyze that. But if it's typically open to the public, then again, agents can enter.
Gracias, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. I think we have questions. We have time for one more question. And this question is about 287G. Semi, which of the 287G agreement models you mentioned is most likely to apply to law enforcement agencies?
Yeah, thank you for that. We don't totally know yet. However, in other states, that have a similar like state highway patrol to what we have here in North Carolina, if those agencies have entered into an agreement with ICE, they have chosen the task force model. And so, we don't know yet which type of agreement law enforcement agencies in North Carolina are going to choose. But another important thing to remember is that, those of us who are residents of North Carolina are most likely to have interactions with State Highway Patrol as compared to those other three agencies, just because the nature of their work is that they are out patrolling on public roads. Whereas those other three agencies, the State Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Adult Correction, and the Department of Public Safety, do less public-facing work. So, I think that what we will want to pay extra attention to is what happens with the State Highway Patrol. So, based off of what we have seen in other states have the task force model, but again, we just don't know yet what that will actually look like here in North Carolina. But we, ACLU and El Pueblo, will share information with you all as soon as we know more.
Thank you very much, Sammy, and thank you very much, everyone. We have to wrap up. It's 8:01. Thank you very much, Sammy, Julianne, Michelle, and Helen, for all the information you have shared with us today. Thank you very much to those of you who joined us. We're going to be sending you a recording of this webinar to those of you who signed up for it. And we will also post this on our YouTube channel. Please keep an eye out for that information. Thank you very much for everything. All the panelists, thank you very much for to the interpreter Felipe for his amazing work, his words. And we'll be keeping an eye on how this bill will be implemented, and we'll keep an eye on any changes. Both El Pueblo and ACLU will keep vigilant. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.